Well, happy Friday, Colorado. Today is April 21st, 2023. My name is Brandon, and this is your weekly news roundup presented by freestatecolorado.com. Every week, we take a look at some of the headlines across the state, some news stories that may be interesting, maybe something you missed. So pour yourself a cup of coffee. Let's take a look and see what's happening here in our great state of Colorado. First news story I'd like to talk about today is from thefencepost.com, your trusted source for ag news and information. Colorado's right to repair bill is the first in the nation, but not without controversy. From April 14th, 2023, Rachel Gable. Colorado is now the first state to pass a right to repair law for agricultural equipment, but not all of the state's ag groups or even the small number of rural and ag legislators were on the same side of the vote when it passed and sent to Governor Jared Polis. So that's pretty interesting right off the bat. Why aren't rural legislators supporting this bill? Seems like it could be something that benefits our constituents. Let's take a look. The bill saw numerous amendments throughout the process, including one that repeals laws that the federal government applies to, several other complications into this bill. Senator Cleve Simpson, R. Alamosa, called the bill a solution looking for a problem and was in the majority of legislators from ag-heavy districts who did not support the bill. As one of the few members of this body that owns agricultural equipment, that should raise a little bit of a flag with folks to say maybe there is something not quite right in the bill. I think I can highlight that by saying the introduced bill is not quite 4 pages long, but today was the introduction of the 31st Amendment to the bill. Wow, that sounds like a badly written bill, poorly written bill, if you have to amend it 31 times to try and get it right. Simpson said he represents thousands of farmers and has spent his entire 61 years around production agriculture. He said during that time the need for such a bill was never uttered, and only 4 constituents urged him to support the bill. Additionally, government price controls for a manufacturer, which was on earlier versions of the bill, were also troubling. Wow. Simpson supported the right to repair wheelchair bill last year, saying the only repair facilities in the state were in Denver and Colorado Springs, leaving rural Colorado without access to repair services. It is, he said, unlike agriculture equipment in that way. It is still a place government doesn't need to interject itself into solving what arguably is a problem in parts of the state of Colorado. It seems to be centered here in the northeast part of the state. I don't know the disconnect between producers, OEMs, and dealerships in that part of the state. So pretty interesting. Very strange that so many legislators opposed it. It does seem like it's an attempt for the state government to get its hands into the agricultural equipment market, interfere with the relationship between manufacturers, suppliers, dealers for agricultural equipment, and the producers. So potentially this could raise the costs of equipment for Colorado. It could mean that certain equipment only can be sold in Colorado. We see this kind of thing happen in California with automobiles. So, these manufacturers of agricultural equipment might be reluctant to sell their products in Colorado or might not allow certain products to be sold in Colorado because they won't be able to adhere to this new bill that the government has just passed. So, pretty interesting. We'll see how it plays out. Kind of a complicated issue, but let's move on. And take a look at townhall.com. From April 16th, 2023, Kyle Roth. Why safe injection sites lead to more death and suffering from an ex heroin addict. So, real sad story. You've probably seen some of the news headlines about overdoses being one of the leading causes of death of young people in the country right now. The article does go on to say we hear the horrifying statistics daily. Over 106,000 drug overdose deaths in America in 2021, with nearly 30% deaths in people 15 to 34. Wow. In Colorado, overdose drug deaths rose 38% from 2019 to 2020. Very sad that people are using these drugs and using heroin, fentanyl, all of this. Of course, it's in the headlines all the time. So, in this article, this author, Kyle Roth, goes through his experience of being a heroin addict and what it was like. Providing his unique perspective, he opposes this newest bill. Let's take a look. This is the life of an addict that the people pushing safe injection site bills like SB 23 120 in Colorado don't understand. Safe is a ridiculous claim when it comes to death dealing drugs. This bill would authorize, quote, life saving overdose prevention centers, end quote, throughout Colorado. But although the site's supervising medical personnel may prevent overdose death by administering antidote, the brutal reality remains. Enabling addicts to continue shooting poison into their veins is the exact opposite of keeping them safe. The safe injection site bill is cruel, not kind, sentencing addicts to continue suffering as they lose their willpower, minds, bodies, and finally their lives to the demon drug. And there's no antidote for methamphetamine or cocaine overdose, so that the addict could die in the safe site. Wow. Very shocking and sad that this is even happening in our community, but unfortunately, that's the reality. Very interesting article from this guy who has experienced it himself, who opposes the bill and thinks maybe there's a better option out there for helping people. So check that out. Moving on, property tax spikes could be higher than initially inspected in Jefferson County and other Colorado counties. So as you know, as something we've talked about plenty of times, property tax is set to skyrocket, making affecting basically everybody in the state of Colorado. You know, if you own your property, it's a higher property tax bill, of course. If you rent your property, well, the owner of that property is going to have to pass on those increased costs to their tenants or find some other way to mitigate them, you know. So, very unfortunate, very strange situation we're going to be seeing in terms of the affordability of housing here in Colorado continue to get worse. Of course, the state legislature had an opportunity to come in and do something about it, but they decided they wanted to take another approach. From the article, the Jefferson County Treasurer's Office says property taxes could be even higher this year than residents were expecting. State officials in Colorado initially predicted an increase just shy of 30%. New data shows it may be closer to 40 or 50% in some areas. Wow. This year's assessments are based on last year's property tax values, which skyrocketed for many residents. Douglas County is warning residents of similar tax spikes that could be coming there too. Assessment letters are set to go out to homeowners in May. Interesting. The Colorado legislature has already lowered property assessment rates used to calculate taxes and made some shifts. If lawmakers are going to do more, they have about 19 days left in the legislative session to do so. It's going to affect seniors, it's going to affect renters, small businesses who own the building, or rent. So, something to keep an eye on. I hope the voters remember that the reason property tax is so high, or at least one of the reasons why they are so high, these property tax bills, is because of the inaction or failure of our state government. Let's move on, see what else is going on. DenverPost.com, April 18th, 2023. Has Denver lost its edge? Colorado's biggest counties are losing population. The entire northern Front Range, especially Metro Denver, was a hotspot coming out of the Great Recession, drawing in young workers from all over the country and powering one of the fastest growing economies of any region in years before the pandemic. But that important driver of growth looks like it has stalled and even reversed. Colorado may have both welcomed and feared the disproportionate flow of new residents last decade. But this decade, it will need to find a way to attract its share from a shrinking pool of new workers, and early on, it looks like it is falling behind. So pretty interesting there. A trend we've been following here to see Colorado population shifting out of the state in many respects. Denver County, which averaged a 2.1% annual rate of population growth between 2010 and 2019, lost population in 2021 and started growing again in 2022, but it remains down by about 4,300 residents over the 2-year period, or 0.3% last year. The county's deceleration was among the largest regionally and nationally, according to EIG. As in many places with population losses, it reflected a big drop in international migration, outflows of residents to other areas and other states, and a higher death rate because of the pandemic. Huh. Denver, Boulder, Jefferson, and Arapahoe counties lost nearly 34,000 residents combined in domestic outmigration in the past 2 years, according to counts from the U.S. Census Bureau. Over the same time, Weld, Douglas, and Larimer counties saw net migration of 35,656. So pretty interesting, kind of mirroring the trend nationally where voters or citizens are moving out of these blue states, moving out of these high density, high crime areas that are exceedingly expensive and moving to more rural, more conservative, more red areas. Same thing's happening here in Colorado. People don't want to live in Denver, Boulder, and unfortunately Jefferson and Arapahoe counties. People want to move out. People would rather live in Weld, Douglas, and Larimer. Now, of course, a lot of these people are moving from the metro area outside the metro area, maybe to avoid the COVID restrictions that decimated our community so poorly, so did such a bad job hurting our population, but also, maybe to get out of the country, get out into the country, get away from this high density area with all the traffic and the crime and the noise. In 2019, 40% of residents in Weld County commuted to another county for work, compared to only 10% of workers in Larimer County and 8% in El Paso County. It remains a commuter county, but the pandemic caused the rate of workers crossing county boundaries each day to drop to 36%. So, pretty interesting to see how this is happening. Check out the article if you'd like to get more of the information. Let's see what's next on the agenda here. I thought this one was pretty interesting, specifically because in Colorado here, we do have, let me turn this off here real quick. We do have the Make My Day law in Colorado where we have pretty strong self-defense for people in their homes, but it doesn't always work out the way people might think. So this is the Pueblo Chieftain, chieftain.com. Article from April 17th, updated April 18th, 2023, so just a few days ago this week. A Colorado man who shot and killed a new father in May 2021 was acquitted of murder charges Monday. Kevin Woodard, 30, was accused of first-degree murder in the shooting death of 39-year-old Jason Carroll on May 2nd, 2021, following a confrontation inside of Carroll's residence in the 1000 block of Berkeley Avenue. The jury debated for several hours Friday afternoon and Monday morning before finding Woodard not guilty of first-degree murder. Woodard did plead guilty to possession of a weapon by a previous offender, a Class 6 felony, and admitted in court he was not allowed to own a gun when he shot Carroll. During this trial, which lasted less than a week, Woodard testified on his own behalf that he acted in self-defense when he shot Carroll in the chest, killing him. Woodard testified in court that Carroll had come back into the apartment that Carroll shared with his girlfriend, Monica Paradise, and their newborn child in the early morning hours of May 2nd, after he'd left earlier that day following a verbal fight with Paradise. Woodard testified that Carroll grew furious after noticing his clothing and personal possessions, which had been thrown in the trash by Paradise following their fight, were missing. He said Carroll started asking repeatedly for his things while cursing. So, kind of interesting to see this situation of self-defense. A lot going on in this article. Check it out if you're interested. But nonetheless, I wanted to share it because, people, if you are in a self-defense shooting or a self-defense situation, it can be a very difficult situation. You have to be very careful to make sure you're in the right. Of course, you don't want to hurt anybody that doesn't deserve it or isn't an active threat towards you. But it is interesting to see how a jury was able to reverse what the district attorneys, what the prosecutor was going to trying to do, is trying to accuse this person of first-degree murder. The jury said no, they were in self-defense. So very interesting to see that happen in our state. Let's move on. Complete Colorado, page 2. Original reporting and commentary. CompleteColorado.com. Wonderful website. Check it out. Colorado Public Schools Failing Kids on Math by Armstrong, April 18th, 2023. Colorado schools are failing many kids when it comes to literacy. Only 34% of Colorado 8th graders scored at or above proficiency in the National Assessment of Educational Progress, while 73% scored at or above a basic level. Results are even worse for math. Only 28% of Colorado 8th graders scored at or above proficiency, while 63 scored at or above a basic level. So more than 2/3 of students lack proficiency in math, and more than a third bombed the test. Maybe such poor outcomes are good enough for the Colorado Education Association, but parents should be outraged. True, the pandemic hurt scores, but scores before the pandemic hardly were stellar, with more than a fourth of students scoring below basic. Wow. So, a pretty interesting article from Ari Armstrong going into the fact that these public schools, government schools, are failing our students. They're dangerous places, as we've seen in previous weeks, and kids are not getting the education they need. Unfortunately, the state government's trying to throw more money at the problem, but money doesn't seem to be the answer. There might be some structural issues with these schools. School choice is really the best benefit for students to have a better education. Of course, teachers' unions and some of our state government officials are entirely opposed to the idea of school choice, but we got to do what's best for the kids. So, pretty interesting. Good article from Armstrong. Definitely check it out. Let's move on. Sticking with the school subject here from Denver Gazette. Guest column: Denver School Board must resign. Updated April 19th, 2023. Dorian Warren and Lynn Lai. As two mothers with children attending DPS schools, we were brought together by a shared concern for the safety of our kids in the wake of the recent shooting at East High School. Our children are expressing feelings of hopelessness and fear, wondering if they will be safe at school. As parents, it's heartbreaking to see our kids becoming numb to the violence that has become all too common in their lives. That's why we co-founded Resign DPS, a campaign group demanding that all board members of DPS permanently step down. We believe that DPS has failed in their responsibility to keep our children safe. The decision to place a high-risk student in East High School, despite prior weapon charges, and the lack of resources to serve these students, raises serious questions about the integrity of the DPS's board decisions. Wow. So pretty interesting. Very cool to see parents standing up, starting their own political committee or political group, campaign group to go after these board members. Love seeing this. We've seen this all across the country since COVID kind of revealed what's going on in these government schools. And here in Colorado and Denver in particular, schools are not safe. Schools are places that are, as we saw in the previous article, failing their students, not bringing them to a level of proficiency in math and literacy. And there's got to be some accountability. Parents really do need to hold these board members accountable. Parents and voters across the state, across the community. Let's move on. ColoradoPeakPolitics.com, Colorado's conservative bully pulpit. April 17th, 2023. Democrats clash over election recounts. Secretary of State Griswold comes up the loser. Colorado's election chief was shot down by her own party leaders after demanding the Democrat-controlled legislature adopt a measure to chill future recount efforts. Adding insult to injury, the Democrats added what we like to call the shut up and sit down provision, telling Secretary of State Jenna Griswold to stop using taxpayer dollars to promote her own vain self for re-election. We're giving Colorado State Senate President Steve Fenberg a rare standing ovation on this one. Wow. So some big fighting between the state legislature and the executive in the Secretary of State's office. Pretty interesting to see. So Fenberg, who's the Senate president, as we saw, rejected a legislative measure suggested by Griswold to prohibit future candidates like her nemesis, Tina Peters, from paying for a recount that falls outside of the automatic recount trigger. Griswold complained it made her election employees work too hard to have to repeat the process of counting an election every 2 years, even though the agency was paid $100,000 by Peters' campaign for the work. Wow. Fenberg isn't buying it either. I think we want to increase confidence in our elections and not remove options for people. So, pretty interesting article. Check that out. Still a lot going on with our elections. Of course, a never ending battle. Taking a look at CBS Colorado, April 19th, 2023, University of Colorado settled a $5 million class action lawsuit. The University of Colorado has settled a class action lawsuit worth $5 million to students who were denied access to services already paid for during the COVID-19 shutdown. The lawsuit was filed April 18th, 2020, during the shutdown. The suit alleged that CU breached its contract with students after they were charged fees to access various services, which were no longer available once the shutdown began. CU refused to refund the money paid for those services. The attorneys representing the students released a statement that read in part, "It was the right decision to shut down a lot of facilities and services, but it was wrong decision for public schools to keep money for services they weren't providing. Students generally are cash poor in the first place, and it's not fair to keep their money when they're getting nothing in return." The settlement covers all students enrolled during the spring 2020 semester at CU Boulder, Colorado Springs, Denver, and Anschutz campuses. Students can access information about the class action lawsuit and settlement at cucovidsettlement.com. So very interesting there to see that there's at least been some accountability for this public college, basically taking money from the students, from the people going there, and not giving it back, denying them their services. So a little bit of accountability is a good thing. Let's move on. The denverpost.com, crime and public safety, from April 19th. Looks like Colorado free speech fight over legal definition of true threat goes before Supreme Court. So, pretty interesting article, pretty interesting situation going on. There's the Colorado Attorney General, Phil Weiser, in front of the Supreme Court building in his little photo op last December. From Shelley Bradbury, April 19th, 2023. A Colorado free speech case that went before the U.S. Supreme Court on Wednesday could shift the boundaries of what is considered protected by the First Amendment and what qualifies as an illegal threat across the country. Billy Counterman, a man convicted in 2017 of stalking a Colorado musician, is challenging his convictions on the grounds his unsolicited and unwelcome social media messages were protected free speech. At stake is the legal definition of a true threat, a threat of violence that is not protected by the First Amendment. Currently, the definition varies by state. Some states require judges and jurors to consider the speaker's state of mind and intent when a threat was made. But other states, including Colorado, consider only the impact of the threat on a reasonable person, not the threat maker's intent. The only issue before us is, are we going to approve a pure negligence standard that doesn't take into account any of the intentions of the speaker when we prosecute for speech? That is really the bottom line here, Associate Justice Sonia Sotomayor said. Counterman sent as many as 1,000 messages to the musician on Facebook during a 2-year span that started in 2014. She ignored his messages and repeatedly blocked him, but he continued to send messages that implied he was watching the woman, was romantically interested in her, and was frustrated by her lack of response. Wow. Colorado courts found that Counterman's messages were true threats. He was convicted of stalking and sentenced to 4.5 years in prison, but he appealed, arguing that his messages were protected by the First Amendment and that Colorado's law should consider a person's state of mind and intent when evaluating the legality of speech. So interesting article. I'm not sure what to think about this, of course. You always want to err on the side of freedom if there's a free speech issue, of course, but very complicated situation. So check that out if you're interested. Let's move on. 2 more stories here. Changes to Colorado's firearm liability bill are not favorable to gun violence plaintiffs, expert says. From April 19th, 2023, CPR.org, state-funded news media. Now, we did talk about this a little bit last week, but I wanted to follow up on that story. So, proposed new state law promises to allow more victims of gun violence to sue the firearms industry. Supporters say it's meant to hold industry liable for how it markets and sells guns. But last-minute changes may limit which cases will succeed, one expert said. This change is not favorable to potential plaintiffs. This change will reduce the available avenues to potential plaintiffs, said Timothy Linton, a professor at the Georgia State University College of Law who has studied similar laws in depth. Colorado's bill originally set out a code of conduct for the firearms industry, including the prevention of gun sales of dangerous people and avoiding marketing to minors. Under the bill, people could sue for violations of any of those responsibilities. But the bill was amended earlier this month to remove the code of conduct language. Instead, the legislation now says more simply that the industry can be sued if it violates Colorado's Consumer Protection Act and other existing state laws. The Polis administration requested the change, saying that the narrower language would avoid unintended consequences and would be more effectively implemented. The bill's supporters argue the bill still achieves its core goal. It cuts through the combination of state and federal law that have protected the firearm industry from lawsuits. The bill still opens the door for victims of gun violence and their families to sue for a range of reasons, but the new approach can make plaintiffs' cases more difficult to win. Well, there you go. I mean, it seems like it's probably a good thing. It seems like, trying to blame a gun store or a gun manufacturer for somebody using the product to harm another person is pretty ridiculous. So, a good thing, of course, CPR News laments this fact, does not like this idea because they're totally anti-gun. Let's check out the last news story of the week, sticking with our gun rights issue. And of course, some really good news. This is the DenverGazette.com. Marianne Goodland, April 19th, 2023. Colorado House panel kills assault, quote unquote, weapons ban. Awesome. Great news. I was down at the Capitol there till 1 in the morning when this thing got killed. Shook the hands of the legislators who voted against it, at least the Republican ones, and really was able to celebrate this victory. I'll have more of a write up on this about the experience and about what happened down there next week. But legislation that sought to ban so called assault weapons died early Thursday morning after 3 Democrats joined the Colorado House Judiciary Committee's Republicans to kill the bill on a 7-6 vote. Shortly before 1 a.m. Thursday, Democratic Reps Bob Marshall of Highlands Ranch, Saeed Charbini of Westminster, and Mark Snyder of Colorado Springs voted down the legislation along with their Republican colleagues after a pair of amendments to ban bump stocks and rapid fire trigger activators were lost. A subsequent vote to postpone the bill indefinitely drew one additional Democratic vote from Representative Lindsay Doherty of Arvada. That was a weird situation, and I'll write about that. But Representative Epps said that she wanted the PI vote, the postpone indefinitely vote, to be unanimous. Lindsay Doherty was doing remote uh, Zoom in for the vote, so she, I guess, took that at face value and followed what Epps said, but everybody else did not. So I don't know if Epps didn't know what was going on or what. It was a long day. The nearly 15-hour hearing, which kicked off Wednesday morning, drew a 2023 record 522 witnesses seeking to testify. The bill, sponsored by Representative Elizabeth Epps, has divided the Democrats' gun violence prevention caucus, with leading members such as Senator Tom Sullivan, D. Centennial, believing other measures, such as his proposal to improve the red flag law, are better solutions to gun violence. When Democratic lawmakers unveiled a package of 4 gun control bills on February 23rd, the assault weapons ban was notably not among them, nor did lawmakers mention it. In addition, Governor Jared Polis is also believed to be opposed to an assault weapons ban. So yeah, right at the end, it's pretty obvious from the beginning that this bill was going to fail. Epps decided to amend the bill, offer 2 amendments to make it only into a ban on bump stocks or other rapid fire trigger activators. Those both failed as well. Epps was pretty shocked, started crying, but the bill was stopped. It was pretty amazing to see all of the people show up, all of the people turn out. An amazing effort by Liberty leaders across Colorado to fight back, to push back, to defend our rights, and stop the state government from infringing on our ability to defend our families. Well, anyways, that's what I got for this week. Stay tuned, freestatecolorado.com. Some new original articles coming up, and really appreciate your time. Hope you have a great weekend, and take care.